Hi, I'm Lina. Welcome to Lina's Storybook, where we share the most unforgettable audio novels. Let's get started.
Here is the first part of the English adaptation of the novel, tailored to a Western cultural context. I have expanded the descriptions, emotional depth, and environmental details to meet your word count requirements, while carefully citing the original plot points. Right before Liam died, his voice barely a raspy whisper against the sterile hum of the hospital room, he delivered his final, devastating blow. "I'm sorry, but the truth is, I never actually loved you." We had been married for over a decade. Yet, as the life faded from his eyes, he confessed the cruel reality. "Choosing you, it was only because I saw how pitiful you were," he murmured, his gaze drifting somewhere far beyond me. "And because I knew that in this lifetime, being with her was an impossibility." The sterile smell of the hospital vanished, replaced instantly by the sharp metallic scent of a Boston downpour. I was reborn, violently shoved back in time, to the very day Liam Lawson and I first met. I was kneeling on the wet pavement of the university courtyard, looking absolutely pathetic, as I scrambled to gather my scattered sociology notes in the pouring rain. Suddenly, the relentless beating of the rain against my shoulders stopped. A large, elegant umbrella tilted over my head, casting a shadow over my ruined papers, clutching my damp notes to my chest. I looked up and accidentally locked eyes with him. The shock in his deep expressive eyes was unmistakable. He had been reborn too. Yet, instead of pulling the umbrella away in hatred or confusion, he kept it firmly over my head. He looked down at me, his expression a sickening mixture of tragic resolve and forced pity. "I'm sorry," he said softly over the sound of the rain. "I'll leave the umbrella with you. This time. I just don't want to miss my chance with her." I remained kneeling on the wet concrete, staring at the man who had been my husband for 10 years. A heavy silence stretched between us. Finally I asked, "You really don't remember?" In our past life, right after he had poured his heart out about his undying love for someone else on his deathbed, I had leaned in close to his ear and whispered my own parting words. "Otherwise, why do you think you died so early?" "What?" Liam asked, furrowing his brow. The rain was coming down too hard, obscuring my words. He hadn't heard me. I shoved my ruined papers into my canvas tote bag, deliberately stepping out from under the shelter of his umbrella, and hoisted my bag over my head to block the rain. I let out a harsh, cynical laugh. "Psycho," I muttered. If he didn't retain the memory of his final moments in my confession, then I had absolutely no intention of exposing the fact that I had also been reborn. When I pushed past him, his umbrella was knocked slightly off balance, allowing a few cold drops of rain to hit his expensive cashmere coat. "Excuse me," he called out, his voice tinged with hesitation. "I just saw you getting drenched in the rain and wanted to offer you some shelter. I didn't mean anything else by it." There he was, the quintessential gentleman, gentle, approachable, and possessing manners that were virtually faultless. "I just figured something out about my own life," he continued, playing the role of the benevolent martyr perfectly. "So it is fine if I leave the umbrella with you." I ignored him entirely, my boots splashing against the puddles as I prepared to run. But Liam frowned, his sense of chivalry apparently wounded, and reached out to grab the strap of my backpack, just before I could sprint away into the storm. Using the momentum, he forcefully pressed the handle of the umbrella into my palm. By doing so, he stepped entirely out of its protection, letting the torrential rain soak him instantly. Through the thick sheets of water, I couldn't quite make out the expression on his face. "Anyway, I'm the one who wronged you. Just take the umbrella. Try not to catch a cold," he said, his voice dripping with dramatic sacrifice. I found the entire display utterly laughable. Seeing that I hadn't immediately thrown the umbrella back at his face, he smiled at me, two distinct dimples forming at the corners of his mouth. "I'm sorry," he murmured softly, gazing at me with those deeply emotive eyes. "If I am destined to die young in this life, I refuse to miss my chance with her." He took a step back, letting the rain plaster his dark hair to his forehead. "Summer, I truly hope you find happiness in this life." He was completely trapped in the delusion of his own profound devotion. Honestly, I had half a mind to wrestle him to the ground and have him committed to a psychiatric ward right then and there. Liam came from extreme old money, and examining the umbrella in my hand, I realized it was a custom-made, high-end designer piece. I briefly wondered how much I could get for it on eBay. In my previous life, even as I was dumping Liam's ashes into a literal manure pit on an abandoned farm, I still hadn't found peace. In the end, my heart was consumed by one single burning question. Why me? Even though I had long suspected he harbored feelings for someone else, I had foolishly clung to hope. I believed that after spending so many years together, building a life and sharing a home, I must have meant something special to him. But the devastating truth was that from the very beginning, my genuine, wholehearted love was nothing but a pitiful charity case in his eyes. What I had believed was mutual affection was merely him settling. In his twisted mind, he was being merciful, sacrificing his true love to validate my pathetic devotion. Even now, having been reborn to a time before the worst of it began, it was impossible to just let it go. When I finally pushed open the door to my off-campus apartment, the first person I saw was my roommate, Annie Lawson. She was Liam's stepsister. They shared absolutely no blood relation, a fact that had dictated the entire miserable course of my previous life. She was sitting on the velvet sofa, looking impeccably styled. As she offered me some expensive macarons she had brought from her family's estate, her eyes darted to the large expensive umbrella I was holding. She let out a sharp gasp. "Did you run into my brother?" Her posture immediately stiffened, and she trailed nervously behind me as I walked into the kitchen. "My brother, Summer. What do you think of my brother?" she pressed, her voice tight with an anxiety she couldn't quite hide. "I think I found this by the dumpster," I replied, answering only her first question. Ignoring her shocked expression, I pulled out my phone, snapped a few well-lit photos of the designer umbrella, and immediately uploaded it to a luxury resale app. "Found it. But that umbrella belongs to my brother, and he is not the type to just throw expensive things away." "Summer, did something happen between you and him?" She was so incredibly paranoid about my non-existent relationship with Liam. Living through this a second time, I found my patience for Annie Lawson was absolutely zero. The hair that Liam had tearfully confessed he couldn't have on his deathbed was exactly this step. Sister standing in front of me. Looking back, there had been countless subtle insidious hints throughout our marriage. I finally understood why Liam always recoiled from any physical intimacy with me. Whenever Annie was in the room, I understood why a single tearful midnight phone call from Annie was enough for him to abandon our honeymoon in Greece and fly straight back to the States. In the beginning I had been naive. I didn't overthink it, assuming they just had a tight-knit sibling bond. Annie had always been the clingy type. She loved whining and acting spoiled with the people close to her. She made it a point to strategically insert herself whenever Liam and I were on a date, just to assert her dominance and presence. Their family dynamic was complicated, and they had relied heavily on each other growing up. I had convinced myself that she simply lacked a sense of security and was struggling to adjust to her brother being a married man. Liam enabled her behavior endlessly. He used to hold my hands and promise me, "Once Annie gets married and settles down, everything will go back to normal." But the reality was, even after she got married, nothing changed. Her marriage was a cold, calculated business merger with a man she had zero romantic feelings for. If anything, the loveless marriage made her cling to Liam even tighter. The moment the blinders truly fell from my eyes, the moment I realized Liam was genuinely in love with Annie was during the kidnapping. Annie and I had been taken together, held for ransom in a freezing abandoned warehouse, when the kidnappers threatened to kill us both. Liam's frantic, desperate pleas over the phone were entirely focused on ensuring Annie was safe. He didn't ask about me once. "Yeah," I finally answered her, snapping back to the present. "Your brother really isn't the type to waste things. That is why he is so efficient. Acting as your brother, your dad, your boyfriend, and your husband all at once." "What the hell are you talking about?" Her voice spiked into a shrill shriek, her face flushing a deep, furious crimson. "My brother and I are absolutely not like that. Summer, you're acting so weird today." She narrowed her eyes at me. "Did my brothers say something to you?" Her reaction was a perfect carbon copy of how she acted in my past life whenever I dared to point out their inappropriate boundaries. When Liam found out back then, he had patiently coaxed me, gently explaining that Annie had been deprived of affection as a child and needed patience. He always looked at me with such deep oceanic tenderness. When he manipulated me, that I continuously ignored the glaring red flags. She truly had been sheltered by Liam her entire life. Her bratty personality hadn't suffered a single day of real-world hardship. I looked at her flushed, indignant face, gave her a bright, mocking smile, and raised my middle finger right in her face. "Don't mess with me today, Annie. I'm in a seriously bad mood because of my explosive temper that afternoon." Annie didn't dare initiate conversation with me for the next few days. However, her overall mood seemed ecstatic. She constantly floated around my space, performing silent, exaggerated displays of whatever secret she was so proud of. The mountain of packages arriving for her at the apartment grew exponentially, all of them high-end luxury brands from Fifth Avenue. Our other roommates gossiped that she had recently bagged a wealthy, handsome new suitor. I knew exactly who that suitor was, Liam. The thought of it just made my stomach turn. On the bright side, the luxury resale app notified me that a very generous buyer had purchased Liam's umbrella for an exorbitant price. I didn't understand the niche market for designer rain gear, but I gladly pocketed the massive payout. Life was relatively peaceful for a little over a week. That was until I was working my usual evening shift behind the register at the local corner drugstore, and I ran into Liam again. The drugstore I worked at was situated well off campus. It wasn't remotely in an area he would naturally pass through. "What a coincidence," he greeted me, stepping up to the counter. He was wearing a black surgical mask, and his voice sounded incredibly muffled and congested. He had a heavy nasal tone. The rain was terrible that day. "I'm so glad you made it back okay." Because he had played the chivalrous hero and forced his umbrella onto me, he had caught a severe cold. I remembered a massive hurricane in our previous life. Annie had been safely tucked away in her massive gated mansion with a full staff of maids. Yet she called Liam crying that she was scared of the thunder. Liam had immediately abandoned me in our own home, driving out into the treacherous storm to be by her side. When he finally returned, he was burning up with a dangerous fever. My heart had ached for him so badly that I stayed awake for days nursing him back to health, entirely neglecting my own exhaustion. Now, staring at his sickly, masked face, my only thought was, not my problem. Whatever love I once harbored for this man had been meticulously ground into dust through years of subtle torment, and the final remaining spark had been snuffed out entirely during that warehouse kidnapping. Ironically, it was shortly after the kidnapping incident that he was diagnosed with a terminal illness, leaving him with only a few years to live. I didn't utter a word to him. I simply grabbed the pack of premium sanitary pads he was buying for Annie, scanned them, and shoved them into a plastic bag. He suddenly looked flustered, an artificial blush rising above his mask. "My sister has been in a rather bad mood these past few days. She keeps getting angry at me, and I honestly have no idea what I did to upset her." I stared at him blankly. "Did anyone ask?" "Sorry," he murmured, his clear, expressive eyes locking onto mine with a practiced vulnerability. "I just didn't want you to misunderstand and think I was buying these for a girlfriend." I continued to stare at him, deadpan. He blinked rapidly, a nervous tic he always had. His gaze was impossibly gentle, carrying a damp emotional weight. "Have you been doing all right?" "You haven't paid yet," I cut him off sharply. "Stop holding up the line for the people behind you." By the time my shift ended and someone came to relieve me, it was already 9 p.m. The weather had been miserable all week, so I had gotten into the habit of keeping a compact umbrella in my tote bag. When I pushed open the heavy glass doors of the drugstore, the cold night air hit me, and I instantly noticed Liam was still lingering outside. I had honestly assumed he'd left hours ago. He was standing under the street lamp, holding the plastic bag from the store. When he saw me walk out, his eyes crinkled into a warm, relieved smile. "I finally caught you," he said. I stood under the awning, watching him in silence. There was no denying Liam was conventionally attractive. He had a great physique, and carried himself with effortless grace. His words were always dipped in honey, constantly creating this potent, intoxicating illusion that he was deeply in love with me, that he was a man of profound, unwavering devotion, just like right now, standing patiently in the misty rain, waiting in the cold just to see me. It looked exactly like a romantic scene ripped straight out of a Hollywood movie, complete with the moody lighting and the rain. As I unzipped my bag to grab my own umbrella, I noticed him open his. It was the exact same custom designer umbrella I had just sold online. A wave of deep unsettling confusion washed over me. Hadn't he been reborn too? Hadn't he dramatically declared that this time around, he wouldn't miss his chance with his precious stepsister? He had literally given me a heartfelt farewell speech, wishing me a happy life without him. So why was he going out of his way to approach me now? What was his endgame? The current version of me was a broke college student. I had absolutely zero value for him to exploit. "Do you really hate me?" he asked quietly. Noticing that I was ignoring him and opening my own umbrella to walk away, I stopped and looked back at him. "You're haunting me like a ghost. What? Do you have a crush on me or something?" He blinked rapidly again, that subtle, telltale sign that he was lying through his teeth. "I just want to be friends." He bought back the umbrella I sold on the internet, tracked down the random drugstore where I worked, and now he wanted to be friends. I listened to the rhythmic, scratching sound of the rain hitting my umbrella. The plastic handle in my palm felt freezing cold. He had no idea that I retained my memories of our past life. I had no idea what kind of twisted game he was trying to play. "Why?" I demanded. "If we count every second we've interacted, we've barely spoken 2 sentences to each other." Liam smiled, a strange nostalgic look crossing his features. "I've just never met a girl as fiercely stubborn as you." Suddenly it clicked. "Ah, I get it," I said flatly. "You saw me looking pathetic and drenched in the rain, and I looked like a stray cat to you. Are you just a huge animal lover?" In our previous life, during our very first encounter, Liam had tilted his umbrella over me and said those exact words. "The rain is so heavy. Why is there a little stray cat out here without an umbrella?" The sickening truth was that from beginning to end, he had only ever viewed me as a pathetic pet to be kept for his amusement. We were never equals. My words struck a nerve, rendering him entirely speechless. "You want to be friends but I don't," I stated coldly. "Sir, you've been crossing my boundaries constantly, and now you're straight up harassing me and interfering with my job." "I'm sorry," he whispered, "but I genuinely want to be your friend. I know you're an incredibly kind-hearted girl." I heard the unspoken subtext loud and clear. He just thought I was a good person, a convenient compliant tool. He didn't love me, but keeping me around as a friend would soothe his conscience, allowing him to easily write off all the trauma he caused me in our past life. But then again, could a man who successfully faked being in love with his wife for over 10 years actually possess a conscience? My stomach churned with nausea. I turned to leave, but the sharp sound of a ringtone pierced the night air. It was Annie's exclusive ringtone on his phone. I could hear her bratty, whining voice through the speaker. Liam, answer the phone." I threw him a look of pure, unadulterated disgust. The phone rang 3 consecutive times before he finally shot me an apologetic look and accepted the call. The female voice on the other end dragged out her words in a slow, needy drawl. Instantly, the look in Liam's eyes melted into absolute, devoted warmth. Even over the sound of the rain, without hearing the exact words, I knew exactly the kind of manipulative nonsense Annie was feeding him. I had absolutely zero interest in watching their twisted sibling romance play out on the sidewalk. I turned on my heel and walked away. Liam took a few frantic steps after me. "Wait." But then Annie said something else through the phone, and his voice immediately went soft, as he dedicated all his energy to coaxing her, giving up his pursuit of me entirely. When a person suddenly finds themselves with too much free time, it becomes dangerously easy for the mind to wander back to the darkest corners of the past. For the sake of my own sanity and emotional well-being, I threw myself into a high-stakes, university-wide business case competition, desperate to keep my mind occupied. I spent my days buried in the campus library, collaborating with my team members from dawn until the campus streetlights flickered on. It had been a decade since I last touched this level of rigorous academic coursework, and my brain felt like a rusted machine trying to grind its gears back into motion. To catch up to the sharp, ambitious 20-year-olds around me, I had to put in twice the effort of anyone else. One evening, I returned to my dorm suite, long after the stars had blanketed the Boston sky, utterly exhausted. Annie Lawson was lounging on her unmade bed, talking loudly on the phone with Liam. She was whining in that sickly sweet, spoiled tone of hers. The moment she heard the deadbolt click and saw me walk through the door, her voice artificially spiked in volume. "Liam, I can't talk right now, my roommate just got back. If I keep talking, she is going to get so annoyed with me." She practically yelled into the receiver. I dropped my heavy canvas tote bag onto my desk chair with a dull thud. "I really don't mind," I called out over my shoulder. "Feel free to continue your performance." I had been pushing myself so hard academically that I felt slightly lightheaded. In the quiet moments, the memories of my previous life truly felt like a bizarre extended nightmare. Rubbing my temples, I just felt a profound sense of mental fatigue. If I had known this major required so much exhaustive research, I might have picked something less demanding. By the time I finished washing up in the cramped bathroom, Annie had ended her call. She was standing in the center of the room, looking incredibly smug as she made an announcement to me and our other two roommates. "So, my brother is taking us all out for a fancy dinner at a Michelin-starred restaurant this weekend. You guys absolutely have to come and do me this favor." I shook my head, trying to clear the residual economic theories floating in my brain. "I'm busy this weekend. I can't make it." "No way, Summer, you have to come." Over the past few weeks, no matter how exhausted or distracted I wasn't entirely oblivious to the sharp venomous hostility Annie harbored toward me. Liam and I barely interacted. So what could possibly be her problem? Was it still about that designer umbrella? I frowned, looking her dead in the eye. I said I don't want to go. "What? Do you view me as a romantic rival or something?" She choked on her own breath, clearly not expecting me to be so brutally direct. "What? How could you even think that?" she stammered, her face turning pink. Whatever." She quickly pivoted, trying to change the subject. "I just wanted to introduce my amazing brother to you guys." I ignored her completely and went to bed. It wasn't until Sunday evening, after my teammates and I finished compiling a massive stack of research data, that I finally checked my phone. Our dorm group chat was blowing up like crazy. My two other roommates had been frantically private messaging me, begging me to come to the restaurant. Apparently, Annie was holding them hostage, refusing to let them order any food until I arrived, essentially starving them out. I scowled at my screen. This kind of petty, manipulative emotional blackmail was incredibly irritating. However, I didn't have any grudges against my other two roommates. In my previous life, after Liam died, they were the ones who helped me track down the absolute most disgusting, abandoned farm outhouse to dump his ashes into. I owed them that much. I grabbed my bag and took an Uber to the upscale restaurant Annie had chosen. The moment I walked into the private dining room, my two roommates let out an audible sigh of relief and practically dragged me into the seat between them. "Thank God you're finally here," one of them whispered frantically in my ear. We were about to throw up from sheer awkwardness and hunger. From the second I sat down, I felt a heavy impossible to ignore gaze land on my face. Seeing that I had finally arrived, Annie perked up and flagged down the sommelier to order. She leaned heavily against Liam's arm, resting her head near his shoulder, and smiled at me with a sickeningly sweet expression. "Summer, what do you think of my brother?" she asked. She put on a flawless act, making it seem as if she genuinely had my best interests at heart. "Honestly, I've been secretly shipping you two for a while now. Do you want to try going on a date with him? My brother is incredibly gentle, and obviously, he is gorgeous. What do you say? Besides, you've never even had a boyfriend. You wouldn't be losing out on anything by dating my brother. And, hey, if he ever dares to mistreat you, I'll totally have your back and put him in his place. Keep the good ones in the inner circle, right? You're my absolute bestie." She shook Liam's arm playfully. "Liam, say something. Weren't you always casually asking me about Summer's schedule? Men need to take the initiative, you know. She practically shoved his arm. Liam looked across the table at me, maintaining a polished, polite smile that belonged on the cover of a magazine. Summer. He started, his voice a low, soothing baritone. Would you be willing to try getting to know each other? In my previous life, after our initial encounter in the rain, we had exchanged phone numbers. Because of the favorable impression he made that day, we started texting casually, building a connection. It wasn't until purely by chance that I discovered his connection to Annie. Back then, Annie had pulled this exact same stunt, trying her absolute hardest to play matchmaker and push us together. But back then, I was young, naive, and experiencing my first real crush. I was entirely blind to the flash of profound sorrow and loneliness that crossed Liam's eyes whenever Annie pushed him toward me. Now, the private dining room fell dead silent. My roommates didn't dare make a sound. They just exchanged nervous, wide-eyed glances with each other. I took a slow, deliberate sip of my iced water. No. I'm not willing, I said flatly. My blunt, unhesitating rejection clearly caught them both completely off guard. For a split second, they both sat there in stunned silence. Annie was the first to recover, her voice pitching upward defensively. Why not? My brother is 100 times better looking than those nerdy guys you hang out with at the library all day. Or, is it because you're mad at me, Summer? She added, her lower lip jutting out into a practiced pout. Liam pursed his lips, pressing them together into a thin line. His intense gaze never left my face. After a long, agonizing pause, he adopted the persona of a deeply concerned confidant. Has something happened at home? He asked softly. Is your father making things difficult for you again? Summer, I promise you, I would never judge you for your family's financial or personal situation, he added, considering that in this current timeline, we were virtually strangers. His question was a massive, wildly inappropriate overstep of boundaries. My expression instantly frosted over. I have never spoken a single word to anyone about my family situation, I said, my voice dangerously low. Mr. Lawson, not only did you stalk me at my off-campus job, but now you're privately investigating my background. If you continue to cross the line and harass me, I won't hesitate to file a police report. I grabbed my bag from the back of my chair and stood up. Liam panicked and immediately shot to his feet. Summer, I'm so sorry, please. That is not what I meant. Without a second thought, I grabbed the full glass of iced water from the table and threw it directly into his face. He froze, standing perfectly still as the ice cubes clattered onto his expensive suit lapels, and the water dripped down his nose. He looked utterly stunned, unable to process what had just happened. We are not close. Do not call me by my first name, I snapped. I turned my chilling gaze toward Annie, and I don't know what twisted fantasy world you live in, but trying to pawn your backup orbiters off onto your friends. Do you just think your friends are easy to manipulate? Or do you just get a sick thrill out of using people as your personal shields? Too broke to buy a decent distraction. Your particular brand of pathetic behavior is truly something to behold, I sneered. After I stormed out of the restaurant and hailed a cab back to campus, my phone started buzzing continuously with texts from my roommates. They gave me the play-by-play apparently. Annie felt so thoroughly humiliated by my outburst that she broke down into pathetic, dramatic sobs. Liam had immediately pulled her into his arms, holding her tightly and whispering sweet nothings to comfort her, looking completely heartbroken for her. All of this, despite the fact that Liam was the one standing there dripping wet, looking like a drowned rat from the water I had just thrown in his face. I let out a harsh laugh as I read the texts. A toxic man and a manipulative woman, truly a match made in heaven. Honestly, I had far too many important things on my plate to waste my mental energy on their twisted soap opera. Every day, I sat in front of my laptop, compiling case study data, and formatting reports well past midnight. Annie ended up taking an extended leave of absence from our classes and moved back into her family's estate. I couldn't have been happier about it. The dorm was finally peaceful. Being forced to look at her every day had been a constant drain on my patience anyway. Meanwhile, an unknown number kept sending text messages to my phone. I didn't need to guess who it was. I had memorized that phone number entirely against my will in my past life. It was Liam. I completely failed to comprehend his thought process. Nor did I have the spare time to try and psychoanalyze him. With the academic competition rapidly approaching, my roommates were incredibly considerate, tiptoeing around the suite to ensure they didn't break my concentration. However, it was impossible to ignore them. When they lugged massive towers of delivery boxes into the living room, I asked about them in passing and found out they were all for Annie. She was literally living off campus, yet she purposely had all her luxury items shipped to the dorm just to make a point. But thinking back, Annie always had a massive roster of wealthy suitors. The men showering her with Prada bags and Cartier bracelets weren't exclusively just Liam. Ah, I see. My brain, which had been steeped in academic journals for weeks, slowly pieced together the very obvious truth. No wonder when Liam was reborn, he confidently declared he wouldn't miss his chance with her, yet he somehow still hadn't managed to lock Annie down in a relationship. Annie had an endless supply of men orbiting her. Liam simply hadn't made the cut to be the sole recipient of her attention. She refused to let go of her devoted stepbrother. But she also refused to let go of the validation from her other wealthy suitors. In my memory of our past life, Liam was incredibly controlling, constantly trying to manage her life and prevent her from associating with other men. Even her eventual loveless, strategic marriage to a corporate heir was a last resort, forced upon her because the Lawson family enterprise was on the brink of complete bankruptcy. Because of that, Liam's guilt toward her had been suffocating. I still remembered his exact words. "Summer, you have to be understanding. Annie only married a man she doesn't love to save our family. It was a sacrifice for us." Her life after the wedding was miserable. She had genuinely fallen for her new husband. But from day one, he had drawn a firm, icy boundary between them, treating it purely as a business transaction. He barely saw her once a year. She wanted the billions of dollars, but she also demanded the obsessive love of everyone around her. The world simply doesn't work like that. In the midst of my grueling schedule, I would occasionally get updates about Annie's life through the dorm grapevine. She hadn't shown her face in classes at all, so my chances of running into her on the sprawling university campus were virtually zero. According to the rumors, she had jetted off on a lavish vacation somewhere, accompanied by Liam. Whenever she spoke to our roommates, her tone dripped with a manufactured sense of superiority, as if she were desperately trying to prove a point to someone. I absent-mindedly opened Instagram and scrolled through my feed. Cross-referencing with my roommate's phone, I realized Annie had posted several close friends' stories that were specifically targeted to be visible only to me. In my past life, she absolutely loved playing these petty psychological games. She adored projecting the image of a perfectly happy, untouchable socialite, curating a beloved princess persona for the internet. It affected absolutely no one, least of all me. After a moment of consideration, I opened her direct messages and typed out a text. "Does it genuinely make you feel that insecure when you have to face me?" Then, mimicking her exact sickeningly sweet tone from the restaurant, I added, "OMG. I am so sorry I make you feel so inferior. Weren't we supposed to be absolute besties?" I watched the little typing bubble pop up. "Annie is typing." But by the time I finished editing a massive Excel spreadsheet an hour later, she still hadn't sent a single word back. When I refreshed my Instagram feed, it was suddenly much cleaner. She had completely deleted all of her targeted stories and replaced them with a single passive-aggressive text post against a black background. Not going to waste my breath arguing with psychotic losers, I simply commented, "Hilarious." A few minutes later, she deleted that post too. I decided to leave it at that. I didn't want to push my new digital pet too far and break her completely. Liam hadn't reached out to me or shown up anywhere near me for nearly a month. His friend request on my social media still sat at the very bottom of my notifications, completely ignored. He had been reborn and given a second chance to rewrite his life. Naturally, I had been given the exact same privilege. and I intended to use mine much better than he was using his. When a person finally has a moment of downtime, it becomes dangerously easy for the mind to drift back into the suffocating memories of the past. To save my own sanity, and frankly, my cardiovascular health, I threw myself entirely into a massive university-wide business case competition, desperately hoping the grueling workload would keep my mind occupied. I practically lived in the campus library, spending my days huddled over laptops and whiteboards with my team members. It had been over a decade since I last engaged with this level of intensive academic theory, and my brain felt like an engine caked in rust. If I wanted to catch up, I knew I had to work twice as hard as the ambitious 20-year-olds around me. After weeks of relentless preparation, my team and I had finally finalized our presentation. I took a rare day off from my part-time drugstore job to focus entirely on the final review. We stayed at the library doing mock presentations until the sky turned pitch black. After offering each other words of encouragement and waving goodbye, I walked out of the library's heavy glass doors, only to immediately spot a tall, familiar figure standing under the amber glow of a street lamp. It was Liam. I furrowed my brow, a wave of pure disgust rolling through my stomach. "Why didn't you go to your shift at the drugstore today?" he asked, stepping out of the shadows. Seeing the sheer revulsion on my face, he quickly raised his hands in a placating gesture. "Please don't misunderstand. I was just in the area buying a few things and happened to be passing by. If you have something to say, spit it out," I snapped, glancing at my phone to check the time. It was getting incredibly close to the dorm's curfew. He took a deep breath, looking at me with those painfully earnest eyes. "About what happened last time, Annie was entirely in the wrong, and I want to formally apologize on her behalf. But Summerlin, I truly genuinely just want to be your friend." I stared at him, genuinely bewildered by his delusion. "What exactly do you think your genuine intentions are worth to me?" I would never, for as long as I lived, forget the moment he chose to save Annie's life over mine during the kidnapping. I had zero desire to waste another second breathing the same air as him. I turned on my heel and began walking briskly toward my dorm building. Just before I keyed into the main entrance, I paused and glanced over my shoulder. He was still standing exactly where I left him, his gaze fixed intensely on my back. Seeing me look back, a faint, hopeful smile touched his lips, as if he thought he was wearing me down. Without breaking eye contact, I pulled out my phone, opened the camera, and snapped a clear photo of him lingering in the dark. I immediately texted it to the dorm's resident advisor and campus security. "Hi. There is an older guy who isn't a student loitering outside the women's dorms, just staring at people. It is really creeping me out," I typed. The RRA replied instantly. "Received, sending security over now." By the time I took the elevator to my floor and glanced out the hallway window, I was highly satisfied to see 2 campus security guards aggressively escorting Liam off the premises. When I unlocked the door to my suite, I was unpleasantly surprised to find Annie actually spending the night in the dorm for a change. I ignored her, washed my face, put in my foam earplugs, and climbed into bed, exhausted. But Annie kept raising her voice, practically screaming my name until the sound pierced through the earplugs. Seeing that I was ignoring her, she switched to a venomous, passive-aggressive tone. "Some people act all high and mighty, pretending they don't want anything, but behind everyone's back, they've already hooked up with a sugar daddy. So shameless," she sneered. "And to think I actually treated a certain someone like a sister. Turns out my bestie was secretly bleeding my brother dry for cash this whole time." One of my roommates nervously tried to intervene. "Annie, please stop saying things like that. Just keep it down. Summer has a massive competition tomorrow morning." "How am I making things up?" Annie shrieked. Thrilled that someone had engaged with her, she purposefully cranked her volume even higher. "When I was on vacation with my brother, he kept sneaking away to take secret phone calls. I finally eavesdropped and found out." She paused for dramatic effect. "Some people's deadbeat fathers are actually harassing my brother, begging him for money." She was being unbearably, deafeningly loud. I silently climbed down from my bunk, walked over to the trash can, and fished out a stale, rock-hard half-eaten bagel that had been sitting there since yesterday. Without a word, I forcefully shoved it directly into Annie's open mouth. The room instantly plunged into a blissful, shocked silence. My roommates stared at me in absolute terror. But thankfully, they tactfully chose not to ask any questions. I calmly climbed back into bed, acting as if absolutely nothing had happened, and closed my eyes. It had taken me years in my previous life to completely sever ties with my alcoholic, gambling-addicted father. Thinking about it now, I realized that since I had been reborn, my father hadn't actually come looking for me to cause trouble yet. Thanks to the adrenaline and the lingering irritation from the night before, I barely slept a wink. When I quietly slipped out of the dorm suite early the next morning, my roommates were all still fast asleep. I didn't want to waste my precious mental energy or ruin my mood by interrogating Annie about what she meant. Deciding I would deal with that headache after the competition was over, I met up with my team outside the massive university auditorium. It wasn't until I actually stepped into the grand, imposing venue that a delayed wave of nervous tension finally washed over me. Fortunately, our weeks of brutal preparation paid off. When it was our turn to present, the words flowed out of me effortlessly, and I delivered my portion of the pitch entirely without notes. It wasn't until nearly noon, as I was sitting in the audience watching the other teams, that I finally checked my phone. There was a new message request from Liam. The brief text simply read, "Wishing you the best of luck on your competition today." If I wanted to know the truth about my father extorting the Lawsons, asking Liam directly would be far more efficient than trying to decipher Annie's dramatic rants. The mere thought of my father sent my mind spiraling into a chaotic mess of dark memories. I forcefully locked my phone screen, forcing myself to take a deep breath and clear my mind. There were dozens of teams from various elite universities participating. As one of the teams walked onto the brightly lit stage, my eyes caught a glimpse of a surprisingly familiar figure in their ranks. But as he stepped up to the microphone and the stage lights illuminated his sharp, aristocratic features, I felt a sudden disconnect. He looked familiar, but also incredibly foreign. Who was that? Someone I had known. In my past life, I was staring at him so intensely that my teammate nudged me sharply in the ribs, teasing, "What are you doing? I know he is gorgeous, but don't drool over the competition." I watched as his team concluded their impressive pitch and walked off the stage. I finally looked away. "I'm just respecting our opponents," I replied dryly. When the lunch intermission was announced, my teammates immediately headed to the catering tables. I told them I'd catch up and made a beeline for the registration desk to check the official participant roster when I had a question burning in my mind. It physically pained me to leave it unanswered. I remembered the sequence number of his team and ran my finger down the printed list of names. Checking them one by one, my finger abruptly stopped over the name Ethan Vance. I narrowed my eyes, a cold realization washing over me. If my memory served me right, this was the man who would eventually become Annie's husband in an arranged corporate marriage. In my previous life, my interactions with Ethan Vance were incredibly sparse. The few distinct memories I had of him all occurred in the horrific aftermath of the kidnapping. Because Liam was solely obsessed with Annie's safety, Ethan, acting in his capacity as Annie's nominal, arranged husband, had eventually shown up to the police station. Though he arrived quite late, when Ethan walked in and saw Liam frantically hovering over Annie, he looked genuinely baffled by the dynamic. He had then turned his attention to me, offering a few surprisingly gentle words of comfort and checking if I was physically okay, before abruptly leaving to handle the police reports. Years later, when I was trapped in the Lawson mansion, caring for Liam after his terminal cancer diagnosis, Ethan had pulled me aside at a social event. He had kindly, yet pragmatically, warned me to start transferring assets into my own name before Liam passed. I carefully placed the participant roster back onto the table. The lunch break wasn't very long. I quickly scarfed down a bland catered sandwich and spent the rest of the time sitting on the floor of the auditorium lobby, my laptop plugged into a wall outlet. The semester was coming to a close, and with summer break rapidly approaching, it was high time I secured a serious corporate internship. To be completely honest, up until this exact moment, I hadn't formulated a concrete plan on how to exact my revenge against Liam. But staring at Ethan's name had sparked an idea. Sitting cross-legged on the carpet, I rapidly typed out and formatted a polished professional resume. I found a business center nearby and printed out a crisp copy. The paper was still warm from the printer, bearing a small professional headshot of me that highlighted my youthful, 20-year-old face. Having spent so many years trapped in the shadow of Liam's suffocating love, I had almost forgotten what I looked like when I was young and full of potential. When the final results were announced, our team secured an impressive second place. After the awards ceremony, my teammates were excitedly discussing which bar to hit for our celebration. I lingered at the back of the group, occasionally nodding along with their plans, but my peripheral vision was entirely locked onto the opposite side of the hall. The moment I saw Ethan's team walking toward the exit, I abruptly broke away from my friends and power, walked directly toward him. "Excuse me. Sorry to interrupt," I said clearly. I purposefully planted myself directly in Ethan's path. He seemed entirely accustomed to this kind of aggressive female attention. The moment he noticed me approaching out of the corner of his eye, his posture shifted defensively, anticipating the interaction. He stopped exactly half a meter away from me, maintaining a polite but impenetrable distance. The female members of his team had already left, but the male students surrounding him instantly started hooting and making obnoxious kissing noises. "Damn, Ethan's striking again. What is this? The fifth girl this week," one of them laughed. "Wait, hold on. I recognize her. She is the girl who completely killed that presentation earlier," another guy chimed in. "Wow, she was on the team that took second place. Ethan, your luck with women is seriously unreal." Surrounded by his frat bro teammates, Ethan maintained a polite, flawless smile, but his eyes were chillingly aloof, betraying a flicker of deep-seated annoyance. His friends were being incredibly loud, so I stood there patiently, waiting for them to finally shut up. When the laughter died down, I reached into my canvas tote bag. "I actually don't really use my phone for social media," Ethan interrupted smoothly, his voice practiced and rehearsed. "I'm sorry, but I can't give you my number." I pulled out the crisp sheet of paper and extended it toward him with both hands. Hearing his rejection, I blinked in genuine confusion. "What?" Ethan froze mid-sentence. He looked down at the neatly formatted resume I was offering him. I looked back at him, equally perplexed. I ignored his bizarre comment and quickly launched into a highly condensed 30-second elevator pitch about my academic background and analytical skills. I concluded by pointing at the paper and adding, "Oh, and you can mentally add runner-up in the National Business Case Competition" to the achievements section. When I finally turned to walk away, Ethan was still standing frozen in the lobby, looking utterly shell-shocked. My teammates were waiting for me at the exit, so I offered him a quick apologetic wave and jogged over to join them. As I climbed into the back seat of our Uber, I glanced out the window. Ethan was still standing in the exact same spot, holding my single sheet of paper in his hands, an expression of complete, bewildered chaos on his incredibly handsome face. As he stared in the direction of my taxi, I quickly averted my gaze, leaning my head against the cool glass, as I sifted through my memories of my past life. Everything I knew about Ethan Vance came from either dry, dense articles in the Wall Street Journal, or from Annie's relentless tearful complaining. In Annie's dramatic retellings, Ethan was a heartless calculating machine, who spent 365 days a year away on business trips, entirely neglecting his marital duties. She claimed that whenever she tried to visit him at his corporate headquarters, he would completely ignore her presence. Was it just because he was still young right now? Because honestly, the future ruthless corporate titan currently just seemed like a slightly goofy college kid. After our team's celebratory dinner wrapped up, I returned to the dorm suite. The moment I walked in, I could feel Annie glaring daggers into the back of my head. Every time I turned around to face her, she would immediately snap her head away, pretending she wasn't looking. "What exactly is your problem now?" I asked, exhausted. She bit her lip, her face twisting in fury. "You actually have the nerve to ask me that? Summer Lynn, I have never met someone as utterly shameless as you," she exploded. "It was bad enough when you were spreading disgusting rumors that my brother and I were sleeping together. But to find out you've been secretly seducing him behind my back this whole time. Do you have no dignity? I closed the distance between us in 2 strides, reached out, and forcefully pinched her cheeks together, physically clamping her mouth shut. Do you want to test me and see if I'll sue you for defamation? I threatened, my voice deadly quiet. The moment I let go of her face, she gasped for air and instantly started shrieking again. If you have the guts then. I didn't say a word. I simply grabbed a filthy, wet cleaning rag from the edge of the bathroom sink, balled it up in my fist, and shot her a look that promised absolute violence. She swallowed hard, her eyes widening in fear. She clamped her mouth shut and cowardly retreated to her bed, finally admitting defeat. Less than a minute after I finally accepted his friend request on the app, Liam sent me a message. I completely ignored his generic greeting and typed out a single pointed question. Did you contact my father? I watched the typing bubble bounce for about a minute before his reply came through. I'm sorry. I know you probably don't like me interacting with your family members. I remembered vividly that in our previous life, I had explicitly told him my father was a toxic, dangerous man who shouldn't be engaged with. I had begged him to keep his distance, and not to interfere in my familial nightmare. But Liam, always convinced of his own superior judgment, and viewing himself as my benevolent savior, secretly funneled vast sums of money to my father behind my back. He threw cash into a bottomless pit, paying off my father's gambling debts in a misguided attempt to make him stop bothering me. In our past life, his arrogant interference had sparked countless explosive arguments between us. I truly hadn't expected that even after being reborn, Liam would possess the exact same arrogant savior complex and do it all over again. Why did he always feel the need to meddle in things that didn't concern him? But then, a sudden realization washed over me. My fingers hovered over the glass screen. For a moment, I typed, "My dad is a terrible person. You didn't give him any money, did you?" Liam replied instantly, "Of course not." Reading those 3 words, I knew for an absolute fact that he had paid him off. I decided to play along and feign ignorance. Then why is Annie going around the dorm saying you did? If you didn't give him anything, please explain it clearly to her. I refuse to be labeled an extortionist for something I didn't do. After sending that, I put my phone on silent, and didn't reply to anything else he sent. In my previous life, my deadbeat father had died in a sudden tragic accident, and I had spent years in therapy clawing my way out of the trauma he inflicted. He was a severe alcoholic, who would come home completely wasted, and any slight inconvenience would result in him violently beating me. My mother bore the brunt of his rage, covered in fading bruises and fresh cuts. She tried to escape a few times, but he always hunted her down and dragged her back. Eventually, on a perfectly sunny, beautiful afternoon, she couldn't take the abuse anymore, and ended her own life right in front of me. My father felt absolutely zero remorse. His only complaint was that her death brought him bad luck at the poker tables. Back when I was blindly in love with Liam, I naturally wanted to protect him from being dragged down by a parasite like my father. But now, since Liam had so much disposable wealth he was desperate to throw away, and a pathological need to play the hero, I would gladly let him. By using Liam as a financial shield, I could guarantee my father would stay far, far away from me. Over the next few days, I had no idea what Liam said to his stepsister, but Annie's behavior shifted. Whenever she looked at me, her eyes were filled with a sharp, venomous malice. She was clearly seething with resentment, yet she didn't dare utter a single insult to my face. I didn't have the luxury of time to care about the Lawson siblings' internal drama. Following up on the resume I had practically forced into Ethan Vance's hands, I officially submitted my application through his company's online portal. When I received an email confirming an interview date, I let out a massive sigh of relief. My days as a university student were rapidly dwindling. While my roommates were all frantically stressing about securing entry-level jobs and internships, Annie continued to live her life as a carefree, spoiled socialite. It seemed the absolute worst hardship she had ever endured was the tragic realization that Ethan Vance wasn't madly in love with her. Liam was always there to catch her, providing her with the best of everything money could buy. He constantly justified his excessive coddling by telling me, "Our blended family dynamic is complicated, and Annie grew up starved for affection. I'm her older brother. It is my duty to treat her a little better to make up for it." Meanwhile, I found myself constantly adjusting my sleeves to hide the faded childhood scars my father had given me. In the early days of our past relationship, Liam would gently trace those scars, his eyes filled with heartache. He would pull me into a tight embrace and whisper, "It is okay, it is all in the past now." But as the years dragged on, he started turning a blind eye to my pain. Sometimes, if I was struggling, he would even accuse me of playing the victim. He would snap at me, "Annie is my sister. Her emotional needs have absolutely nothing to do with whatever hardships you suffered in the past. Summer, stop being so unreasonable and jealous." Back then, I was young, broken, and had handed him my entire heart. Facing Liam's gaslighting, I always internalized the blame and felt overwhelmingly inferior. I typed out a polite confirmation email for my interview, locking my laptop screen just as Annie strutted into the dorm suite. She was fully glammed up, loudly unboxing her latest Fifth Avenue designer bags and ensuring everyone knew about them. She was completely addicted to being the center of the universe, convinced the world revolved around her every whim. People who live entirely in the clouds tend to suffer the most catastrophic injuries when they finally hit the pavement. On the morning of my corporate interview, I carefully applied a light professional face of makeup. Annie watched me from her vanity mirror, offering a cold, sarcastic sneer. "You'd better not be dressing up to go see my brother," she muttered. I glanced at her reflection, but didn't bother to respond. Just weeks ago, she had been aggressively trying to force me into Liam's arms. Now, she was intensely guarding him, terrified that I might actually have contact with him. Liam had been blowing up my phone with text messages every single day, so I had permanently muted his notifications. I truly couldn't fathom the psychological gymnastics happening inside the Lawson family. When I left the dorm building, I immediately noticed someone trailing me. I pretended to be oblivious, leading my shadow all the way to the towering glass skyscraper in the financial district where Vance Corporation was headquartered. After successfully navigating my interview, I stepped into the elevator to head back to the ground floor. Purely by coincidence, Ethan Vance stepped into the same car. As we walked out into the expansive marble lobby, I caught sight of Annie sneaking around the revolving doors out of the corner of my eye. I maintained my composure, acting as if I hadn't seen her, and politely bade Ethan farewell. Whether in my past life or my current one, I harbored absolutely zero romantic interest in Ethan Vance. However, I was morbidly curious to see if Annie would plunge headfirst into her obsessive pursuit of Ethan again. Just as she had before, the answer, unsurprisingly, was yes. Starting that very day, Annie's entire demeanor changed. She completely stopped being passive-aggressive toward me. Instead, she bizarrely reverted to trying to play matchmaker for Liam and me. She started practically referring to herself as my future sister-in-law, aggressively shoving expensive gifts into my hands to buy my favor. So, she started casually one evening, leaning against my desk. "How well do you actually know Ethan Vance?" I had already officially resigned from my cashier job at the drugstore. I passed the interview with flying colors and was scheduled to start my internship on Monday. But I saw no reason to share that information with her. I put on a perfect mask of confusion. "Who is Ethan Vance?" I asked. Because I hadn't explicitly stated why I was at the skyscraper, she automatically assumed I was a gold digger trying to catch Ethan's attention. She scoffed, rolling her eyes. "Oh, stop playing dumb. You definitely know him." I looked at her, keeping my voice mild. "What makes you say that?" Immediately, she used Liam as her shield. "My brother told me, obviously. He said he saw you hanging around the Vance Corporation headquarters. Ethan is the sole heir to their empire, so there is no way you weren't trying to bump into him." I physically pushed the designer perfume box she had just given me back across my desk. "Sometimes, I genuinely envy you, Annie," I said quietly. She blinked, taken aback. "Why?" "Because being completely oblivious to how utterly shameless you are must make for a very blissful life." Annie's face flushed rapidly from pale to violently red. But miraculously, She swallowed her rage. Summer, I really feel like you've been targeting me lately, she forced out. I let it go when you threw water on my brother and me. I even forgave you for shoving that disgusting, moldy bagel in my mouth. I'm being the bigger person here. I'm talking to you nicely, I'm buying you gifts, and all you do is throw insults at me. She whined. Aren't we supposed to be best friends? Whenever I have something good, I immediately think of you. I didn't try to set my brother up with anyone else. Summer, if you know any rich, handsome guys, you should introduce them to me. You can't be selfish. Watching her desperate, pathetic performance, a brilliantly wicked idea formed in my mind. Since I'll be working full-time in the city, staying in the dorms isn't feasible, I told her. If you pay the security deposit and first 6 months of rent for a luxury downtown apartment for me, I'll give you Ethan's personal contact info. Out of professional courtesy, I shot Ethan a quick text, giving him a heads up that his stalker was acquiring his number. He replied with a single highly expressive ellipsis. I was placed directly into a specialized project group, spearheaded by Ethan himself. The group consisted entirely of fresh talent, and a few sharp graduates from the business case competition. It felt like a sandbox for the corporate heir to test his leadership skills. My end of the bargain was simply to provide Ethan's contact information. Whether Ethan actually accepted her requests or replied to her messages was entirely out of my hands. Initially, Annie was practically vibrating with excitement. But after hitting a brick wall of silence from Ethan for weeks, her attitude soured rapidly. I offered her a piece of fake sympathetic advice. Chasing a guy requires genuine sincerity. If you keep asking me to do the legwork, maybe I should just go after him myself. Honestly, I added, twisting the knife, I find Ethan's type much more attractive anyway. She looked at me, as if I had just declared war. Unsurprisingly, she completely stopped trying to be my friend, and instead ordered Liam to double his harassment efforts. Can we please just meet up? Liam texted me, the weather is dropping, make sure you wear a heavy coat. He added later. He had essentially reduced himself to a pathetic unwanted weather app. Even during the absolute peak of the honeymoon phase in our past life, he had never been this suffocatingly attentive. I left every single message on read. Meanwhile, I assumed that working as an intern directly under the CEO's son would be a relaxed, networking-heavy gig. I was dead wrong. Ethan was a relentless, demanding workaholic. After weeks of brutal overtime, having my proposals torn apart, rejected, and heavily revised, I was feeling incredibly defeated. I rubbed my tired eyes, my brain feeling like absolute mush. In my previous life, after marrying Liam, I had foolishly believed in the fairy tale that a prince would shelter me from the harsh realities of the world. I followed his advice, quit my career, and became a trophy wife, hiding out the storm under his umbrella. Being out of the corporate arena for over a decade meant my analytical skills were incredibly rusty. I felt like a set of jammed gears trying to force themselves to turn. As I stared blankly at my monitor, my gaze accidentally drifted across the open concept office and landed directly on Ethan. Naturally, he chose that exact moment to look up, our eyes locking. My stomach dropped. Just as I feared, he immediately called me over and demanded a progress report. I had no choice but to bite the bullet and present him with a highly ambitious, unpolished project pitch. The core strategy of the pitch was designed specifically to seize the blue ocean market sector, the exact same untapped market that Liam's family had monopolized in our previous life to build their empire. If Liam had retained his memories of his past life, he would undoubtedly start targeting this sector much earlier. I absolutely could not pass up the opportunity to crush the Lawson family's future before it even began. Ethan fell silent as he meticulously read through my proposal twice. No other corporation in the industry had attempted this yet, and the Vance Corporation was notoriously risk-averse. But from my memories, I knew Ethan was a predator who wasn't afraid of a calculated gamble. That was exactly why I had handed him my resume in the first place. This is an incredibly bold concept, Ethan finally said, looking up at me. His eyes gleamed with genuine approval. The risk profile is massive, but the potential payout makes it worth exploring. Our newly formed division finally locked onto a concrete direction. The perk of having the heir apparent as your direct supervisor was that before my probationary period was even halfway over, I was formally offered a high-paying full-time position. The thought of actively driving the Lawson family toward financial ruin filled me with boundless motivation. Ethan looked at me with the deep appreciative gaze reserved for a highly efficient corporate workhorse. When I finally clocked out late that evening, the skies had opened up into a torrential downpour. "Need a ride?" Ethan asked, holding his car keys. I smiled politely. "No thanks, I brought an umbrella." He nodded, not pressing the issue, and headed toward the executive garage. As soon as I pulled my umbrella from my bag and stepped out of the lobby, a familiar silhouette emerged from the mist. Liam stepped forward, his umbrella held high, staring with a complex dark expression at the taillights of Ethan's departing car. "What is your relationship with him?" Liam demanded, his voice tight. I stared at him incredulously. "How is that any of your business?" "He is not a good man," Liam warned darkly. "You need to stay away from him." Liam absolutely despised Ethan. But what did that have to do with me? "Oh right," I shot back mockingly. "Because you're the pinnacle of moral excellence." He opened his mouth to argue, but the shrill sound of his custom ringtone cut him off. It was Annie. I sneered internally, popping open my umbrella and preparing to walk away. Liam hesitated for a fraction of a second before silencing the call and chasing after me. "Can we please just talk?" "No." "Why do you have so much hostility toward me?" he practically pleaded. I stopped and looked at him. His features were exactly as I remembered them, designed to make anyone he looked at feel like the most important person in the world. Yet somehow, I had become the villain in his narrative. "Let me ask you something," I said sharply. "You're clearly in love with Annie. Why are you constantly harassing me? If I recall our very first meeting, you dramatically declared you weren't going to live with any regrets regarding her." His lips trembled. I don't know," he confessed. "I know the person I've always loved is. But I just can't stop thinking about you. I keep remembering how you looked standing in the rain that day. I keep remembering you." "Can you drop the act?" I interrupted harshly. "It is physically revolting." Liam fell silent, trailing behind me for an entire block before trying again. "You're a truly wonderful girl. The way I handled things initially was thoughtless and offensive. I just want to make it up to you." "Wire me $100 million to show your sincerity then." I deadpanned. Whenever he hit a wall he just pivoted. "Can we at least be friends?" "No." "Then what exactly is going on between you and Ethan Vance?" He was obsessed with that question. He was just my boss, but I refused to give Liam the satisfaction of an answer. "Liam, instead of stalking me and asking irrelevant questions, why don't you spend this energy on yourself? Go to a hospital, get a full body scan, and see if there is a tumor pressing on your brain causing these delusions." I told him coldly. I knew he wouldn't grasp the true, lethal meaning behind my words. Because in his mind, he believed the terminal illness that killed him last time was lung cancer. Because I made my hatred so glaringly obvious, Liam's physical stalking decreased over the next few months. But he continued his relentless digital harassment. Occasionally, I would reply with a single word, and he would enthusiastically bombard me with 10 paragraphs in response. Thanks to his massive financial payoffs, my deadbeat father completely disappeared from my life. Meanwhile, at Vance Corp, our new product launch was a massive success. We violently ripped the market share, right out from under our competitors. Curiously, during our entire meteoric rise, the Lawson family didn't make a single countermove in the industry. I couldn't help but feel somewhat confused. I never doubted Liam's sharp business acumen. Perhaps he had pivoted to a different strategy, but judging by his willingness to pay me for my time, his personal account seemed flush with cash. Because my project proposal was the foundation of our success, Ethan generously granted me a 1% equity stake in the new division. Financially, that small percentage was already worth significantly more than the pathetic inheritance Liam had left me in his will. Somehow, my rapid rise caught the attention of Ethan's mother. She visited the executive floor several times, constantly cornering me to ask if I was single. Finally, she sighed and asked directly, "What do you think of my Ethan?" Ethan, looking mortified, practically shoved his mother into the private elevator. He later apologized profusely, explaining that his mother was obsessed with marrying him off. I nodded in understanding. Was this relentless parental pressure the real reason he had eventually agreed to a loveless, arranged marriage with Annie in our past life? Neither Ethan nor I harbored any romantic feelings for each other, so the situation didn't bother me. But Ethan remained visibly awkward and actively avoided me for weeks. I continued to bury myself in my work until one evening, Annie ambushed me in the corporate lobby. The moment she stepped onto the premises, the security guards, having blacklisted her weeks ago, immediately moved to intercept her. But she wasn't here to harass Ethan today. Her eyes were bloodshot, practically bulging out of her head as she glared at me. Her gaze darted momentarily to Ethan, who was walking slightly behind me. It was late, and the massive lobby was mostly empty except for Ethan and me, who had just finished a late-stage review. Normally, we wouldn't be walking out together, but Annie's screaming caused us to stop in our tracks. "Summer Lynn, what the hell do you want from me?" she shrieked hysterically. I hadn't seen her in ages. She looked incredibly haggard, entirely stripped of her glossy socialite veneer. Thinking about it, I hadn't seen her post a single luxury shopping spree on social media in months. Had that Atlantic yacht cruise never happened? I had neglected my digital pet for too long. "Looking at me like this, you must be so incredibly proud of yourself, aren't you?" she spat. I looked her up and down objectively. "I'm doing okay, I guess," I replied honestly. I remembered her face when we were held hostage in that freezing warehouse. Nestled safely in Liam's arms, she had looked over his shoulder to shoot me a look of triumphant, malicious victory. The Annie from that timeline had been far more arrogant than the broken girl standing before me now. The security guards physically restrained her to prevent her from launching herself at my throat. To my surprise, Ethan silently stepped out in front of me, using his body to shield me from any potential attack. Annie's voice cracked, echoing shrilly off the marble walls. "Are you just a complete slut? Seducing my brother behind my back wasn't enough. You had to steal the man you knew I loved, and flaunt him in my face. You stole everyone who ever mattered to me. What else do you want? And my brother is actually defending you. Don't you dare act like you don't know exactly how much money he has been illegally funneling to your deadbeat dad." Believing she possessed the ultimate trump card, she turned desperately to Ethan. "She is a lying, manipulative gold digger. She is only after your money, Ethan. She conned my brother into embezzling millions from our company, driving us straight into bankruptcy. And you're her next target. I am the only one who actually loves you." I was genuinely baffled by the psychological damage required to produce someone as delusional as Annie Lawson. I casually rolled my shoulders, waved off the security guards to give myself some room, and walked up to her before she could spit another word of absolute garbage out of her mouth. I raised my hand and slapped her across the face with everything I had. The sharp crack echoed through the lobby. She staggered backward, her perfectly styled hair flying into a tangled mess as a dark red handprint instantly bloomed across her pale cheek. "Summer Lynn!" she shrieked, absolutely feral with rage. But the guards immediately locked her arms behind her back. "How dare you hit me?" As I flexed my stinging fingers, I saw Liam burst through the revolving doors. He must have rushed over in a panic. Breathing heavily, he stopped dead in his tracks when he saw the glowing red mark on his precious sister's face. Yet, he looked at me and said, "I am so sorry. I never thought she would track you down here to cause trouble." Annie, who had fully expected Liam to brutally avenge her, let out a noise of pure agony. "Liam, are you out of your mind? She just hit me?" Liam shot me a look of profound, exhausted apology, and reached out to pull Annie away. "I'm not leaving," Annie screamed, thrashing against him. "Why does she get to live such a perfect life? Make her pay the money back, Liam. Tell everyone how much cash you gave her father." That absolute parasite was showing up at our corporate offices every single day causing a scene. If it wasn't for paying him off to protect you, we wouldn't be bankrupt right now. Typical Annie, she always without fail blamed the consequences of their incompetence on everyone but themselves. Did she honestly have absolutely zero critical thinking skills? I couldn't believe we had managed to get into the same university. She continued screaming obscenities at me, attempting to humiliate me on every possible level. From the very start, we were never comparable. Yet, she harbored this massive, inexplicable inferiority complex toward me. Her desperate attempts to matchmake me with Liam in the past must have been solely so she could revel in the sadistic joy of watching me fall in love, only to be cast aside like trash. Her hysterical ranting was violently cut short by a second, deafening slap. Liam had struck her across 2 entire lifetimes. I had never once seen this aggressively protective older brother even raise his voice at her, let alone strike her. Annie looked at him, completely shattered. Tears streamed down her face in thick continuous lines. She shot me one final, venomous glare before wrenching herself free and sprinting out of the lobby into the night. Liam's jaw was clenched tight, but he didn't run after her. I was genuinely shocked. "You're not going to chase her?" He rubbed his temples. Exhaustion etched deep into his features. He forced a bitter smile. "I don't know." Realizing we needed to discuss private matters, Ethan quietly excused himself, giving us a wide berth. Liam watched Ethan leave before turning his damp, desperate eyes toward me. "Do you love him?" I found it incredibly difficult to comprehend my younger self's infatuation with this man. Ethan and I were strictly business associates. The concept of romance hadn't even crossed my mind. Yet, in the twisted minds of the Lawson siblings, everything was filtered through a hypersexualized lens. I ignored his question entirely. "Why exactly did you two show up here today?" Liam swallowed hard, looking at me with that signature, deeply devoted gaze. "The money I gave to your father voluntarily. You don't owe me a cent." I let out a harsh laugh. "I never said I was going to pay you back." He genuinely believed that Annie exposing his secret sacrifices would melt my frozen heart. He was once again drowning in the ocean of his own manufactured martyrdom. "You're deeply mistaken about something," I told him, my voice ice cold. "When my father died, everyone assumed it was a tragic accident, that he had stumbled home blackout drunk in the middle of the night and drowned in the river." "Did you honestly believe my father's death was just a tragic accident?" I asked him softly. Liam froze. The romantic longing in his eyes slowly morphed into dawning, absolute horror. "So stop playing the tragic savior," I spat. "Because all your money did was fund a monster's addictions. You helped absolutely no one but yourself." Liam opened his mouth, but no sound came out. "Honestly, I was always so baffled by you," I continued. "After the kidnapping, even Ethan Vance, a man I barely knew, had the basic human decency to check on me. But you were so convinced of my resilience that you abandoned me completely, entirely consumed by your precious sister." Don't bother making excuses. We both know the truth." Liam hung his head. "I'm sorry," he whispered brokenly. "But living this life over again, I finally realized that I couldn't physically stomach hearing another syllable of his pathetic confessions. I planted my feet, balled my right hand into a fist, and punched him squarely in the center of his face. He let out a sharp cry of pain, stumbling backward as blood gushed from his nose, dripping onto his pristine suit. "None of that matters," I said, shaking out my knuckles. "It only matters to you." In our previous life, when he was dying of a terminal illness, he truly believed I stayed by his bedside out of profound, unconditional love. He had no idea I was just waiting for him to die, so I could secure the inheritance. I refused to spend a decade being gaslit and emotionally manipulated only to walk away empty-handed. Liam shook his head violently, spraying blood across the marble. His voice was thick and nasal. "No, we had so many beautiful memories. You loved me so much." In his mind, he had committed the ultimate sacrifice, giving up the woman he truly loved to stay with me out of pity. He thought he was a saint. And when he was reborn, and finally pursued the sister he wanted, he realized she was a nightmare, and immediately started pining for the obedient, traumatized girl he had thrown away. He did everything for his own ego, constantly seeking ways to move himself to tears. It was psychopathic. Do you want to know why? No matter how early you sought treatment last time, your illness only got worse and worse. I whispered with a dark smile. His pupils dilated in sheer terror. I thought it was strange, too. I mocked gently. I literally told you the truth right before you flatlined. But apparently, the universe didn't let you keep those final memories. Maybe I had actively sabotaged his treatment. Maybe I had intentionally triggered his symptoms at home. Or maybe I had just watched him wither away and done absolutely nothing. Regardless, the truth would forever remain locked in my mind alone. Liam staggered out of the revolving doors, looking like a hollowed-out ghost. Outside, a torrential rain had begun to fall. He stumbled into the downpour, his broken figure rapidly swallowed by the inky black night. Whether he ended up rotting in a federal prison for corporate embezzlement, or suffering through a slow, agonizing death from cancer again, it was no longer my concern. My father, too, might end up behind bars for extortion, or meet another accidental demise. I stood in the lobby and exhaled a long, deep breath. For the first time in 2 lifetimes, my chest felt completely light. As I walked toward the exit, I noticed Ethan was still standing near the glass doors. I was in an incredibly good mood. "Mr. Vance, you're still here." He looked at the dark, punishing rain outside. The night wind carried the sharp, ozone scent of the storm directly into my lungs, and I didn't have an umbrella. "Do you want to share?" Ethan asked quietly, holding up his sleek black umbrella. I looked at his face, and a wave of profound nostalgia washed over me. After the kidnapping in our past life, I suffered from debilitating night terrors. I was haunted by the image of my mother's suicide, and the phantom pain of my father's fists. Even Liam, my own husband, never noticed I was drowning. Yet Ethan, a man who barely knew me, had hesitated in the police station and asked gently, "Are you okay?" Ethan kept the entire world at an arm's length. He was cold, calculating, and his smiles never reached his eyes. But beneath that corporate armor, he possessed a quiet, genuine empathy. Without saying a word, Ethan opened his umbrella and looked at me, waiting. It felt as though the suffocating tragedy of my past life had finally, truly ended. When I was a little girl trapped in a house that felt like a war zone, I used to pray that someone would break down the door and save me. No one ever came. Later, I met Liam, and I foolishly believed he was my salvation, only to realize he had just locked me in a different kind of prison. I looked out at the pouring rain, then turned back to Ethan with a bright, genuine smile. "No thanks," I said. I lifted my canvas tote bag over my head and ran straight out into the storm, because the truth was, I never needed anyone to hold an umbrella for me.
That's all for today. I'm Lina. Don't forget to like and subscribe for more amazing stories every week. Thanks for watching.